Hi, everyone. We're going to do a video about Erasmus. And many of you who've been looking at episodes have noticed that he was the creator of the Textus Receptus that was eventually used to create the King James Bible. It was first used to make the Luther Bible of 1522 and all of his successive editions of the Luther Bible based on Erasmus's work. He was basically the first Protestant in the sense that he was unaffiliated with Catholicism and so on, and he was revered and respected by all the Protestant movement because he really gave the impetus. He was the one translating from the best collated text he could find of Greek and putting it into Latin, which now made it accessible. The latest Greek text made it accessible that anybody who could translate the Latin side of his two-column work could at least create a translation from the Latin to their native language, which is what Luther primarily did because he didn't really know Greek at all. He had a very rudimentary understanding, so he was doing it off of Erasmus. And so Erasmus broke through the logjam that Catholicism had done. We couldn't know, what was the original text, and we didn't have an idea that there could have been mistakes that Jerome had made, and we needed reformation of the Latin Vulgate and then that would be a stepping stone to get to our own individual languages and break that logjam. So this was the man, and he was inspiring to all the leaders of the Protestant Reformation to break through. Now he's living in England, so it's not part of Roman Catholicism. The King of England, King Henry, long ago had broken free of Roman Catholicism. So he is living in a free country, basically, where you can be whatever you want in Christian religion, and it doesn't have to be Catholicism at all anymore. Anyway, so I wanted to find a particular quote I had, and I found it in this book. It's an excerpt of his work, which was called the "In Praise of Folly." In 1509, Erasmus wrote a book, "In Praise of Folly." I'm going to get into that with you in a second. I'm going to give you a little tantalizing tidbit of a quote I'm going to highlight when we get there. And I got it out of this book called Little Journeys by Elbert Hubbard. Not L. Ron Hubbard, Elbert Hubbard. He was a shoe salesman at first, and then he became like a theological writer. And this is not theological, but more of an educator. And what he's doing, he's going to create a book that has Moses, Confucius, Pythagoras, Plato, all these great thinkers, and it's called Great Teachers and Little Journeys to the Homes of Great Teachers. And this was in 1916. It was republished. So we're going to look at this excerpt he has of Praise of Folly. And the quote I was digging up was, which I had found earlier before, but now I'm going to find the greater context, and I wanted to go back to it. I had not seen it until yesterday, the greater context. So we're going to get that. And it's going to be very interesting. And so this is what I've already put in something you've seen before. If you pay attention to the channel, this is what he wrote in 1509 in Praise of Folly. But why do I insist upon any one particular example when in general it is the public charter of all divines to mold and bend the sacred oracles till they comply with their own fancies, spreading them as heaven by its creator, like a curtain closing together or drawing them back as they please? Thus indeed St. Paul himself minces and mangles some citations he makes use of and seems to wrest them to a different sense from what they were first intended for, as is confessed by the great linguist St. Laurent. And by the way, that was actually a pastor who was writing in 1600. There's a book edition I've seen in 1602, so he must have been pre 1506, 1509. So, but he was Protestant basically. Yeah, it had to be. All right, so this is what I was digging up, and I wanted to find the greater context to this, and that's what we're going to go look through today, and you'll find it very interesting, and we'll pick up from there. And just so you know, eventually I hope to find what reference he was making to Jerome, the linguist who supported what he was saying. He is referring back to this man, Samuel Jerome, the works of Samuel Jerome, pastor of Modbury in Doon. And this is a work going back to 1620. There it is, London. So obviously this was published well after the life of Erasmus. So obviously these were published originally in the lifetime of of Erasmus. I did see some indications that the author of it is saying Paul cannot contradict God's word. So you can see, so there's maybe a little bit of that going on. So people are becoming aware as we're getting more educated that there's something wrong with Paul, and that's what Erasmus is exposing, and that's what Aaron also apparently was exposing. But I don't have the time to go through that first. I wanted to show you the greater context of what uh, Erasmus is saying. So now let's just take a look at what is the format of the book Praise of Folly. It's an actual satire. So now I have to go in and explain what that means, because it's going to explain how does he mean these things. Should we take it as seriously as it sounds, or is he satirizing, and so on. So we have to figure that out. Okay, so for help here, we're going to look for the help from Caitlin Stevens and maybe Sorelia Thaxton. Not sure how involved both of them were, but I'm sure Caitlin was. And they're now going to describe what is the format, the overview of the Praise of Folly by Erasmus. So we're going to go backwards this way. And I'm not going to take all of it. I just want to give you a thumbnail. So they're going to describe what the Protestant Reformation is. And the Protestant Reformation is typically considered to have begun with the publication of German priest Martin Luther's 95 Theses in 1517. However, earlier works that criticized the Roman Catholic Church while remaining faithful to it, well, that's the problem. This person isn't being technically correct. It's not, Erasmus is not a Catholic. He's stepping out, or let's put it this way, he's not acting as if he's part of their church. He's acting independently and trying to be a scholar about all the manuscripts, the Greek manuscripts. He's trying to collect them, and by 1516 he will publish them. And he is behind the scenes. He's collecting another man's work who he's publishing, who lived and died in the 1400s, and he's publishing his works, which is exactly the forerunner of what we call the Textus Receptus. This other man had really done a yeoman's work, but he dies. Erasmus completes it, and then Erasmus decides, I'm going to do a final version, and that's what we all think of as the Textus Receptus today. And that became part of the foundation of Luther's Bible, became the foundation of the King James Bible. And so this is the man. So the man who's handing off this work is a person who doesn't, well, you're going to see what he thinks of Paul. And he remains faithful. Again, that's kind of the whole point. Is the work Praise of Folly faithful to the church as he's criticizing it? So I guess it's, what do you mean by faithful? He's definitely faithful to Christ. That's not the point. Is he throwing someone off the bus? Is he trying to get someone out of there that's in interference with Christ? Maybe. So the Praise of Folly also helped pave the way for the Protestant Reformation. So this is a huge, influential book of history. So this is like one of the world's most influential books of all time by one of the most influential figures of all time. And if you ask me, I mean, Luther gets a lot of credit for the Protestant Reformation, but there really could not have been one without Erasmus's work, having set the ground for Tyndale to use. Tyndale's Bible also comes from Erasmus's work, and so on. So everything turned on this man doing work that other people would have taken them years. And he himself, Erasmus, couldn't have gotten to this point unless that man who did all this work in the 1400s had done it first, and then he dies. So, I mean, it took 2 lifetimes to get all of this ready to do a Textus Receptus, just to show you, because these people are acting individually to do a good job for the Church of Christ. Now, what is in Praise of Folly? What is Praise of Folly about? Here is in Praise of Folly summary. The main character is Folly, who is represented as a woman in a fool's costume. She says that she is the reason for man's happiness, and she will therefore deliver a eulogy to herself. So she's going to praise herself, which is kind of the nature of folly. It's kind of egotistical. In the first part of the book, Folly discusses marriages, childbirths, friendships, and relationships of all kinds, all of which she claims would not exist without her. She argues that all relationships need folly and flattery to thrive, and that folly is useful in social settings because it's entertaining. Now, I just want to pause there. Do you really think Erasmus, the theologian, is really trying to say folly is a good thing? No, he's poking fun at folly. So we have to understand he's ridiculing folly that she's praising. But on the other hand, he's couching it all in the terms of he's praising folly. So it creates this ambiguity in the mind of the reader. Is he praising it for real, or is he criticizing it? So you're left in sort of this suspense. So by the way, he was hunted by the Inquisition for a variety of works. This is a way sometimes people had to speak when they couldn't directly say what they want to say, and they would couch it in these type of dialogues almost with somebody else speaking, and are they really to be taken seriously, or is it a means of poking fun at the folly of what he's criticizing? So just to show you, it's a way of avoiding being censored by the Inquisition. Folly also discusses one's relationship with the oneself and argues that self-love is productive, but also requires a certain amount of folly. Again, is he really praising that? No, he's criticizing it. In the second part of the book, Folly discusses the role of folly in professional lives of all types of people. Now, this is where it gets interesting. This is where it's getting to what he's really aiming all of this about, in my opinion. Lawyers, doctors, philosophers, hunters, royalty, gamblers, artists, theologians, and more. She, Folly, claims that folly plays an especially important role for theologians who interpret scripture to fit their own preconceived opinions, intentionally mislead audiences, ignore the true message of Christianity, and live hypocritical lives. That's the point of his book. And you're going to see who he's targeting most of all. Lastly, Folly discusses Christianity and folly, drawing many parallels. She notes that the Bible praises simplicity and ignorance, and that Jesus praised meekness and humility. She even argues that Jesus was the biggest fool of all because he became sin to save sinners, which seems paradoxical. So again, that creates more ambiguity in the reader's mind. Is he praising folly? He doesn't want to. He's not obviously criticizing Jesus for being, in this category. So it's all deliberate. He's now bringing the reader down to not know for sure what was he criticizing all these things in the past. So if the Inquisition came after him, he's going to say, how can you say I was actually criticizing anything? I called Jesus the biggest fool ever, so I wasn't saying it was wrong. So you see, he's giving himself shields. It's sad that people had to write like this in those days to get around the censorship of the Roman Catholic, or even anything. If you were in England and you don't have the Roman Catholic Church, you still have censors. But the Inquisition was such that if your books were published outside England, they would come after you. So they were chasing him. The Inquisition was anyway, even though he didn't live in a Roman Catholic land. All right, so I think that'll summarize that. And now we're going to look at the key. There's two key pages of this book that we'll look at. Well, here, I'll just we'll thumb up here and we'll go right to it. So it begins here at page 178. I'm going to take a break real quick. And I forgot to tell you, we're going to have a big bombshell where I'm going to show you how a complete Wikipedia article is completely fraudulent by a Pauline person and what they did in the end. So hold on. So I went through every citation, every link, and I'm going to show you everything I looked at was the opposite of what they were claiming it was true. And so that's how far you have to dig sometimes to expose ridiculous fraud. But anyway, let's get here for a minute. Alas, this is Erasmus in Praise of Folly, 1509, excerpted in Elbert Hubbard, Little Journeys, at page 179. And so you can find it online at books.google.com and replicate all this yourself. Alas, what dealer in the world would ever get a farthing if he be so wise as to scruple at perjury, blush at a lie, or stick at a fraud and overreaching? So he's basically saying is, uh, you know, how would people profit from lying and that kind of thing? Then he's going to say, it is the public character of all divines to mold and bend the sacred oracles till they comply with their own fancy, spreading them as heaven by its creator, like a curtain closing together or drawing them back as they please. Thus indeed St. Paul himself minces and mangles some citations he makes use of, and seems to wrest them to a different sense from what they were first intended for, as is confessed by the great linguist Saint Heron. All right, so we're going to pause there and just simply say you've already seen that, and I made a point of this in prior episodes, so I'm not going to go further into that. But you can see he's critical of him. Obviously, he's making an accusation that if you look at Paul, he usually and often is twisting passages to say the opposite of what they actually mean in the original context. And to me, he must know that Genesis 15:6, because in Genesis 15:6, he has the translation correct, which is the subject of God. Abraham believed God, and the next verb has no article he. It's just I believed God and counted it as to him as righteousness. Means the counting is Abraham doing the counting, not God. But when you look at the Greek Septuagint that Paul was using, it had an ambiguity. It said Abraham believed God and it was counted to him for righteousness. Well, then that becomes, what is this it? And the it, Paul said, was faith. And now instead of Abraham being the subject of counted, it's now the way Paul's construing is God is the subject of counting, and God is now justifying Abraham for the belief he had that God was going to give him his child in old age. So this is clearly the kind of passage that he knew of, because he was the one the King James Bible was relying upon when it showed the verb believed and counted have no subject different from each other. It's Abraham each time. Abraham believed, Abraham counted. Boom. That's why it's still in the King James to this very day, although the King James tries to weasel in and put a he before the second subject, but it is not there in Hebrew. Anyway, so that's probably what he was thinking about, that particular passage. Now I want to read you this next passage, and this is going to be very interesting. All right, so here we go. Then when that apostle saw at Athens the inscription of the altar, he draws from it an argument for the proof of the Christian religion. This is where he says he sees this unknown God statue, and he says, I'm here to tell you about the unknown God. Okay, and this is in Acts 17, I believe. We'll see what it is in a minute. He draws from an argument for the proof of Christian religion, but leaving out great parts of the sentence, which perhaps, if fully recited, might have prejudiced his cause. He mentions only the last two words, namely, to the unknown God, and this, too, was not without alteration, for the whole inscription runs thus: to the gods of Asia, Europe, and Africa, to all foreign and unknown gods. So, in other words, Paul's looking at a statue that doesn't say to the unknown God, singular, it says to the unknown gods, plural. And then Paul truncates not only the word God, but he cuts off all the reference to the gods of Asia, Europe, and Africa, and to all foreign and unknown gods. So Paul was what? Pretending to be foolish, and like a clown, he says, "Oh, you have this God, this unknown God," and he's expecting the Greek scholars listening to him are going to, allow him to make this slight adjustment to their statue there, which is really to the unknown gods of all these countries. Um, and so let's go on and see what he's going to say. But I'm going to show you where the proof of that comes from and how strong that was, and this Wikipedia article that tries to argue that it meant something other than what it meant. Uh, I guess that's it, is an imitation of the same pattern. I will warn you that our young divines. So now he's going to say what Paul did, this corruption, this misleading use of a source or proof, and taking it out of context. He's saying what Paul did is an imitation of the same pattern. I will warrant you that our young divines, that means those preachers in England, by leaving out 4 or 5 words in a place and putting a false construction on the rest, can make any passage serviceable to their own purpose, though from the coherence of what went before or follows after, the genuine meaning appears to be either wide enough or perhaps quite contradictory to what they would thrust and impose upon it, in which knack the divines are grown now so expert that the lawyers themselves begin to be jealous of an encroachment on what was formerly their sole privilege and practice. And that's true. Lawyers do this kind of shenanigans with sophistry. The divines what he's saying is the divines are making the lawyers jealous, because the divines have gone so far over the edge of basically corrupting the message to the people in the pew, and the people in the pew are what? Dumb. Not, and I don't mean dumb intellectually, but left dumb and stupid because they don't actually get educated. They are being fed a ton of lies and misconstructions and context taken apart and reconstructed to make an objective that isn't even in the text. And so Erasmus sees that in England, in the what is the era he's writing in, 1509. It's trying to construct text to come out the way you want them to come out rather than what they really say. Okay, so now we were just talking about this verse here. It's Acts 17, verse 23, King James. For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription: to the unknown God, singular, please note that, whom therefore you ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you. Now, by the way, Yahweh says you cannot make any statue of me. So this is actually kind of offensive to a Jewish person reading this. Remember, though, the book of Acts, we've proven or shown you, is not written to convince Jewish people or Christians per se, or anybody who's of our faith, to believe in Paul. This was designed to get Paul acquitted at a pending appeal that was pending. When the book of Acts closes, Paul is traveling to Rome due to an appeal that happened due to the events of Acts 21, 22, and 23. So when we're in Acts, at the end of Acts, we are in Rome now waiting for this appeal to be resolved. These books are then written, both the Gospel and the book of Acts, try to win an appeal in front of Nero. So it's trying to appeal to pagans. And that's why this passage in particular is put in the book of Acts by Luke to win favor with him. And this is in a book by Mr. Malk, and it's called Paul on Trial. We recommend every Christian get this book. It's very worthwhile. The book of Acts is a defense of Christianity. But I will look there to see, does he have any information about that inscription? And he does not. But he does say that that it was included. Paul gives a defense which not only connects the judges with his evangelistic message, the unknown God, in verse 23, but also brilliantly defends the legal charge by asserting that the God he worshipped and was proclaiming was already inscribed on that Athenian altar to the unknown God. So he's trying to say, I don't have a new religion. Here it is. You already believe in it. But the problem is he's actually embracing that true inscription is this inscription to all the unknown gods. And we're going to see, is there any evidence that there was any different kind of inscription? So how did we know this? Why did Erasmus know this? Because this comes from Jerome. Now, if you look at when you go to BibleHub.com, you get to look at commentaries like Ellicott and Barnes and Bangles and all that. But when you just go through the whole thing, only one of there were 6 different commentaries. Only one gives you the actual quote of Jerome, and that is Bangles and Noman. So you might want to keep that in mind if you want to see the evidence for what people are talking about. All the other ones just referred to Jerome. But here is the actual quote. But they do not produce any witness of this. Okay. So, let me see. The Greek scholia, that means these annotations that are put in the Bible, bring forward this inscription. And so he talks about that. But there is no evidence to give a witness or verification to the Greek scholia. So here is the only evidence about what is really the background of that passage. Jerome, in his comment on the Epistle to Titus of Paul, says this, quote, the inscription of the altar was not in the precise form which Paul asserted to the unknown God, but in this form, to the gods of Asia and Europe and Africae, to the unknown and foreign and or strange gods. But because Paul's purpose did not require a number of unknown gods, but only one unknown God, he has used the singular number to show that he, whom the Athenians had thus designated beforehand in the inscription on the altar, is his own God. Okay, so Jerome is telling you clearly that this is what he knows from personal knowledge. He's living in about the 380s. He travels through Athens regularly because he goes all the way from Rome to the Holy Land multiple times for multiple reasons, back and forth, and you're going to pass through. It's just a normal part of the path to cross the Aegean, and you land in the peninsula where the city of Athens is, and you probably always are going to step through there anyway, and you'll see the statue. So he knows what's there. If there were a statue to the unknown God, there's no reason anyone remove it. It would be something revered, perhaps, by Christians who are familiar with the book of Acts. So had it really been there, it's no doubt we would have had a memory of somebody saying, hey, there's the statue. But the proof that is not there is there's only a statue to an unknown gods. And that's what Jerome is seeing. And so then, I wanted to verify, well, is there any, what is the evidence? Is there any evidence there was a statue to the unknown God? So I went and looked up the unknown God, and I found an article that claimed that, oh, well, there's lots of evidence that the Athenians worshipped an unknown God. So I went and researched it. And I want to show you, this is the article called, see this up here, Wikipedia, Unknown God. So I looked at it. This article is a fraud, my friends. Complete and utter fraud by some Paulinists, obviously, because it only exonerates Paul. It's avowed intent is to do that even when you read it. Now, here's the statue of the unknown God, but they should mention here it's in Rome. So this is not a Athenian thing. And the unknown God in Rome would sit on top of this little altar here. Okay. So, and he even says it was found in 1820 on the Palatine Hill of Rome. It contains an inscription in Latin, blah, 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 blah. So it's not the same God as in Athens, all right? Then he's going to provide evidence of what proves the unknown God was in Athens at the time of Paul. And it's avowedly trying to vindicate Paul. I'm going to take a short break and we'll be right back. All right, so now let's go through the article one by one, and I'm going to show you this Wikipedia article is a complete fraud, and I don't mind saying that because that's what it is. It's trying to prove that Paul wasn't unjustified, and in fact, there was evidence of an unknown God statue at Athens, and let's see if it's true. So the first thing it cites is this: the unknown God, or agnostos theos, is a theory by Edward Norton, first published in 1913, that proposes, based on the Christian apostle Paul's Areopagus speech in Acts 17:23, that in addition to the 12 main gods and the innumerable lesser deities, ancient Greeks worshipped a deity they called agnostos theos, that is, unknown God, which Norton called un-Greek, and that's footnote 1, and this is the book down here, or this is the book that discusses that. Well, that doesn't prove anything. That's a theory, right? That's not evidence. Presumably, what we're going to now look at is going to be the evidence he cited, and we'll now look at that. In Athens, there was a temple. Now, I'm going to take a quick break. Okay, so now the next one is, in Athens, there was a temple specifically dedicated to that god, and very often Athenians would swear in the name of the unknown god. And then it has a footnote 2. And that seems very specific. You see how confident it's stated, and how, if you were unaware of what the footnote actually says and the support for this has, you would be convinced just by reading it that nobody would say anything that affirmatively and it not say that, right? So let's look at footnote 2. Footnote 2, I drew a line, an arrow, goes down to pseudo Lucian Philopatris 9.14. Now we got to follow the arrow to here. Footnote 2 is about a cult at Athens is bogus. Philopatris. Whoa. So we go to Philopatris Wikipedia article, and so whoever wrote the unknown God one wasn't in control of the Philopatris one, because now we're going to learn the truth about the Philopatris work. Philopatris is a work by a Byzantine is a work of Byzantine literature, which means post Constantine 325. So this is not a early work, or a work that would be any time earlier than Jerome, significantly earlier. So it's the same thing. And it's a dialogue formerly attributed to Lucian. So somebody claimed it was Lucian writing it, but it's not. It's now generally admitted it was spurious. So whoever put it in the words of Lucian, which would put it in the first century AD, was fraudulently identifying the author as somebody named Lucian from the the 100, or basically second century period. All right, so next we'll go to, there is no citation for Apollodorus, and Wikipedia says citation needed. Whoever did this article provided nothing, so we're not going to look up something we have no citation for. Philostratus, that's footnote 3. So then we follow the arrow down to 3. That's Vita Apollonia 6.3. Then we follow the arrow down here. There's 3. Went over to livius.org, found Philostratus, Life of Apollonius. We're trying to find 6.3, so we go down to this one, and then that leads us to this article from Life of Apollonius, translation by Cornbeer, published in 1912, Loeb Classical, that matches the entire reference in the Wikipedia article. We then go to Philostratus, Vita Apollonii, 6.3. We copy the entire text out. Okay, so it's all here. And then we look through the whole thing, and we find there's only one reference. And does it say God or gods? It says gods. I do not class the form of sobriety, for it is as much greater proof of wisdom and sobriety to speak well of the gods, especially at Athens, where altars are set up in honor even of unknown gods, plural. Does that support the doctrine of unknown God? Absolutely not. The presence of any kind of worship of the unknown God separate from unknown gods? No way. So that does not support what the person, whoever created the Wikipedia article, said it should mean. So we're on to one last thing, and that's Pausanias, description of Greece. And we're going to take a footnote 4 down here. And we got this from the article by Bengal, and I just copied it down here. And then if you read, here's what we find. Pausanias says that there were gods having names other than others to be unknown gods. So Pausanias is not saying he saw inscriptions to an unknown god. He saw inscriptions to gods or having names or unknown gods. So he never said, I saw an inscription to an unknown god. So you have, again, Pausanias, the citation here is bogus, and therefore We have no evidence whatsoever that there was ever anything at Athens other than the inscription to the unknown gods. And that inscription existed in the time of Jerome. And that's why he could confidently say that Paul had actually was looking at that, cut off the S on it, and then told the Athenians of something. So again, this supports what was the point of Erasmus. If we go back now to what Erasmus's point was, and we'll take a look at that one more time, and I'll be right back. All right, so now let's read Erasmus's point one more time. Thus, when that apostle saw at Athens the inscription of the altar, he draws from it an argument for the proof of the Christian religion, but leaving out great parts of the sentence, which perhaps, if fully recited, might have prejudiced his cause. He mentions only the last two words, namely, to the unknown God. And this, too, not without alteration, meaning he's going to drop off the S from gods without alteration. For the whole inscription runs thus: to the gods of Asia, Europe, and Africa, to all foreign and unknown gods. It is an imitation of the same pattern, I will warrant you, that our young divines, by leaving out 4 or 5 words in a place and putting a false construction on the rest, can make any passage serviceable to their own purpose, though from the coherence of what went before or follows after, the genuine meaning appears to be either wide enough or perhaps quite contradictory to what they would thrust and impose upon it, in which knack the divines are grown now so expert that the lawyers themselves begin to be jealous of an encroachment on what was formerly their sole privilege and practice. All right, so clearly Erasmus is ridiculing the people the Paulinists, who follow the model of Paul, and they then corrupt the text and give a false reading of the Bible to their parishioners, to their listeners. And that is indeed a true fault of Paul. He is taking this quote out of context, the unknown God. He's changing the actual original context to make it apply to his God, which is unscrupulous and unethical. And it just fits in with Paul's view that if I lie for my gospel, why am I still called a sinner? Romans 3:7 says the same thing in more detail in 1 Corinthians 8 and I think it's 8 and 13, where he basically says you can pretend to be law compliant around those who are and not law compliant around those who aren't law compliant, and then fit in, be basically pleasing. I please all men in all things so that I may save some. That's what he says in those passages. In other passages, he says it's dishonorable to try to please men, and instead of, you shouldn't do that. He's against people pleasing, except when it's to advance the gospel. So he makes a big, huge exception for being a people pleaser and a deceiver when it comes to advancing the gospel. It's very clear, and we'll go through that in other episodes. We have a series we began on guile in Paul. All right, so guile in Paul is a fact according to Erasmus. So there's good witnesses. And now one more step back. Erasmus is the editor of the Textus Receptus, the first creator of it. That was used to create the Luther Bible in 1522. Erasmus made an edition in 1516 and 1519. And Luther, I think, used the 1519 one and maybe used another edition later when he came out with another Bible. So Luther and the Reformation was building off of the work of Erasmus for sure. And then later, Tyndale in the 1530s used Erasmus's work as well. So there's the first use of the Textus Receptus. And then in English, and then when the King James Bible came along, it adopted 84% of its words from Tyndale's 1530s work based on the Textus Receptus, and then made its own further readings to create 16% of its Bible was a variation of the readings that were made by Tyndale, and that's where we get the King James Bible from. So Tyndale's really the author of the King James Bible. So 84% came verbatim from him. 16% came from whoever were the editors who worked on the King James Bible. So we need to really know the proximity of our King James Bible was to somebody who translated in 1534 from Erasmus's work. So the Textus Receptus of Erasmus, 84% of it definitely came from was the sole text being used by Tyndale in 1534. So that's where it really comes from. And Erasmus was a guy who was anti-Paul, for sure. All right, God bless everybody. Take care. Ciao. Bye.